my position of last but not least, I must say, listening to all this, it does sound like everything is very Premier League stacked to these 12 or 13 or even 5 or 6. I mean, if, foreign buyers can come in when the warning lights were there, this Dai Young, I think he'd done this in China and in Belgium, so sort of, it was foreseeable this might happen. And he's not paying the fines, is that right? Seems resistant to all of this. And you guys are, what would meaningful fan involvement actually look like? Because you've said that, fans should have a say. But if all this is happening with Everton as well, they do loads of stuff in the community. They're being massively penalised on criteria that's very unclear and is changing again, the goalposts literally shifting. It just feels, how are fans going to have a say? Do we have to have the Germany 50.1% model of actual ownership?
I think there are quite a few questions in there, and some of them are definitely mine. I think we have said ultimately, if we have proper fairer redistribution so that clubs don't require £15 million of owner funding, maybe that makes fan ownership more viable. That depends on whether fans want to own clubs, but certainly that is a direction that we can head in. I think it's a bit facile at times to just think in terms of, well, we can't penalise the fans of the clubs that has transgressed, because we have to think of the fans of the other 71 clubs that haven't. So we always have to keep that in balance. And the idea of simply separating owner from club is not really, that's not normally viable, because it is the club that has transgressed. I said in the Reading case, we are specifically going after the owner. But we think if we have a better regulatory system, if we have a fairer distribution system, then we will get better quality owners, which in part is why we're more than happy to be moving to the regulator. We're more than happy for the regulator to take over the owners and directors test, so that we all have a common aim in bringing about lasting improvements.
Rick has spoken eloquently on the situation at Reading. I think you said something there about the penalising fans. As I said, the best thing for everybody is for clubs to stay within the rules. You also said that you didn't think the rules were clear to fans, and I think they are clear. They've been in place for 10 years, and people understand. But
the Everton criterion is far from transparent, isn't it? How they've been deducted so many points.
Okay, so
it's not
on that particular issue of the Premier League's approach to sanctioning, whether it be a rule breach for for PSR rules or other rules, we have an open sanctioning regime, and that's an active decision to leave it to the independent panel to decide, because it gives them maximum flexibility to decide in the circumstances, having listened to all the mitigating arguments made by the club and by the Premier League, to make its own decision. And whilst that may not be clear, we believe it's the fairest way to do it.
I mean, it just looks very fishy. And again, with foreign buyers, if it's governments, they can do all this sports washing stuff. It just feels this is all about cold hard cash. Some of the questions Julie was saying, non-league games are having massive attendances through the roof. Shouldn't more of your pyramidal structure go down to those people at the very bottom, Pitshanger FC, Hanwell Town, those kind of people that don't have the huge broadcasting rights and wages bills stuff that we've been talking about, or we've alluded to today?
As I said, we redistribute £1.6 billion outside of the pyramid. That goes to all parts of the game. I'm not quite sure which tier Hanwell Town are in, but it goes as far as the National League divisions. The money we put into the Football Foundation, the Premier League Stadium Fund, is available to all parts of the game, including women's game and women's facilities. So there is money that goes to all parts of the game that comes from the Premier League, and we believe that's the right thing to do, and we're proud of it.
I mean, it just feels with these parachute payments, it's a bit of a prolongation of the status quo rather than the real grassroots. And the sort of surprising things when someone shoots up, I wonder if they'll be more unlikely. You mentioned, I was there when Brentford went up actually at Wembley, and there were grown men in tears. They'd seen it happen at the old Wembley, the new Wembley. They were so excited. I wonder if you're sustaining what's happening now with the way these payments work, that there'll be less fun moments, little people. I don't know. I remember when Cameroon got in the quarterfinals. When was that? 1990 or something. Those surprise things. I just feel, I don't know.
There's lots of surprises, and I think the aspiration that makes the pyramid tick is still there. It's still, we've got Luton back as our 51st club. So the Premier League is just over 30 years old. It's had 51 clubs in it during that period. There's plenty of opportunity to get into the Premier League. We welcome everybody, whether you're Luton or Brentford, who've made a success of their promotion, are doing really, really well. It's up to the club to make that opportunity work for them, and we believe we provide the platform to be able to do that.
I wanted to ask on something else that there's been resistance to regulation, and that's the 3 p.m. broadcast blackout slot. I think it's been there since the 60s, and there's good arguments for it, that match day income stays and all those kind of things. But there is an argument, women's football, we've not really dwelt on today, is in many ways a separate entity, correctly so. Last week at this committee, the Sports Minister said there is an argument for lifting that 3 p.m. ban in the case of women's football, so it has a dedicated slot. What would you say to that, both of you?
Rick, do you want to go first?
Yes. So we support the growth of women's football. First and foremost, that we think the potential is enormous. It's very, very important that we embrace the growth of women's football, and in so doing, hope to not to repeat many of the mistakes that we've made in the men's game. The Article 48 blackout is complex, and it's not as simple as saying, well, we can apply it differently for the women's game. There is one Article 48 that applies to the game. We can't sort of conjoin the men's and the women's when it suits and separate them when it suits. So our interpretation and the legal interpretation is that Article 48 embraces the entire game. So if we disapply it for women's football, we also have to disapply it for men's football. That has far-reaching implications, because the whole idea of Article 48 is not just to protect attendances at games. Historically, it was always to protect participation. 3 o'clock on Saturday was seen as being really important. So that is by far from a trivial position, and ironically, I think Article 48 is maybe the one area where the Premier League and the EFL is absolutely joined at the hip. There's absolutely nothing between us on that. We do think that very, very careful consideration is needed before Article 48 goes.
Maybe a small celebration, we can agree that we can agree on something, albeit that we're trying to resolve a thorny issue, which is how do you best help develop the women's game in this country. Like Rick, we are great supporters of the game. Our clubs are big investors in it and big participants in it. Indeed, we've made had a number of discussions with the FA over the years about how we can assist. Whether it's right the Premier League should become involved, whether it should be entirely separate, and that's an ongoing thing. So very recently, our clubs agreed that it would make a financial loan to the new co, which has been set up at the top of the women's game. And the Premier League would have a seat on the board, and also provide a whole bunch of services to the game in respect of advice about how to commercially develop the league. And I hope that's the start of something that still has to be approved by the WSL board. But I hope that's the start of a relationship where the men's game can help the women's game to develop on a whole raft of different areas. But I agree with Rick. Unfortunately, you cannot divide Article 48 commitment into different bits. There's nothing to suggest that we can do that, and we have a commitment going forward to apply Article 48 across the FA, the Premier League and the EFL for the foreseeable future.
I mean, in some ways it has been broken anyway, because, I don't know, our kids' generation know how to stream these things illegally from foreign channels. So, I mean, in some ways it's eroding as opposed to in the 60s when it was set up anyway.
Illegally, yes.
When would you like to see the women's game televised? If we're not going to have a dedicated slot, or if that's not going to be...
In a sense, nobody has a dedicated slot. I mean, the Premier League is under a sort of regulatory obligation to televise 200 matches a year, and it does so outside of the closed period. Does that in 5 slots, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and 1 on Monday night. But the EFL are regularly televised in similar slots as well. So it's difficult to find a dedicated slot for anybody. There are gaps in our calendar when they overlap, where the women's game can take precedent in international breaks and things like that. But I think that the closer we work together, the more likely we are to find some additional opportunities for the women's game to take advantage of in the broadcast markets. And I know they're currently in the broadcast market at the moment, trying to find new partnerships for the foreseeable future.
I mean, hasn't that lack of a dedicated slot been part of a, if there was a consistent, dedicated, predictable viewing slot, don't you think that's sort of hindering the commercial development of women's football? Couldn't that be a way
when that dedicated slot would be? I mean, imagine a world where Article 48 didn't exist. It wouldn't just be create an opportunity. If it didn't exist, essentially, if the commitment to it was taken away, then you would see everybody televised at Saturday at 3 p.m, including German football, Spanish football.
But when should it be if it's not 3 o'clock on a Saturday?
Well, if it has to be a dedicated slot, I think what you mean by that is when no other men's football is being broadcast, that's very difficult to find a slot that exists that is attractive to the women's game. Because if you put it on at Sunday lunchtime at 12 p.m, that's not a particularly attractive slot. Sunday evening, Friday nights. It's not obvious what the answer to the question is, Rupa.
Rick, are you of the same opinion?
I think Richard's highlighted the practical issues, absolutely. And again, nobody has a dedicated slot. We're all fighting for slots. And
you think that would not be a good thing, because it could help grow the women's game? We've seen with the Lionesses, it's at an all-time high, can go higher.
I'm totally convinced about the potential of the women's game, and absolutely convinced about what the Lionesses have done. The thing we like most about the new co is the 75-25 revenue split, which we think is very progressive and will lead to the sustainability of the game. And not against helping them to grow their TV audience in any way, shape or form, but it's the simple and facile answer would be yes, of course we'll find a dedicated slot. That wouldn't be the right answer. We're more than happy to try. We're more than happy to support the women's game. But it is a complex question. It's not a trivial. It's not a binary question. It's not a trivial question. It's a complex question because of all the interest in the game.